Good day, brothers and sisters, and welcome to Zion Hill Baptist Church. We are at 6175 Camilton Road in the city of South Fulton near Atlanta, Georgia. We are so glad that you have come to share with us on this day, this our Bible for Life class. We have a great class in store for you, we believe, and we'll be praying that God will certainly open up your heart and your mind that you might receive what God has in store for you on this evening. We ask that you would first join us in a word of prayer. Eternal and gracious God, we are thankful for your many wonderful and glorious blessings. We're grateful, God, for another day, a day to call upon you, a day that you have made. Help us, God, to rejoice and be glad in it. God, some of us have gone through many difficulties just in this day. But God, right now, we are thankful that you have allowed us to make it thus far. Continue to be with us, to guide us, strengthen us. Move, God, now in this service, that what may be said or done will lift someone's spirit, inspire someone's heart, and cause someone to turn to you. We ask these blessings and offer this thanks in Jesus' name. Amen. Again, brothers and sisters, we want to welcome you. We want to say just a few things to our local brothers and sisters who are here in the Atlanta area. The city of South Fulton once again is engaged in a food giveaway along with the Atlanta Community Food Bank. That will take place on this Friday, June the 26th at 11 a.m. until 2 p.m. or until all of the food has been distributed. That will take place at Welcome All Park at 4255 Willie Road in the city of South Fulton. We also want to say to the young people of Zion Hill, make sure that you get in your scholarship applications. For those of you who are joining us who might not know exactly what we are talking about, well, here at Zion Hill, we actually bless our young people who go to college or to trade school with the opportunity to receive a $1,200 scholarship that is renewable up to 4 years. Our young people have to meet certain requirements in order to receive that. But we try to bless them, to let them know that we indeed support their pursuit of education. Be mindful as well, my brothers and sisters, of the upcoming virtual services via live streaming. Join us for our Sunday morning worship service, June the 28th at 9:30 a.m. and next week for our Bible for Life class on July the 1st, Wednesday. Let us also not forget that on July the 5th, that is Sunday, July the 5th, we will have our virtual communion Sunday. God bless you and God keep you. Now, to bless us now with a wonderful song, with a beautiful voice, Sister Christiana Cox.
Lift up mine eyes to the hills, from which cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord who made heaven and earth. He said he would not suffer thy foot to be moved. The Lord which keepeth thee, he will not slumber nor sleep. For the Lord Lord is thy keeper. The Lord is thy shade upon thy right hand. Upon thy right hand. No, the sun shall not smite thee by day, nor the moon by night. He shall preserve thy soul, even forevermore. My help, my help, my help. All of my help cometh from the Lord. I will lift up mine eyes to the hills, from which cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord who made heaven and earth. He said he would not suffer thy foot to be moved. The Lord which keepeth thee, he will not slumber nor sleep. For the Lord is thy keeper, the Lord is thy shade upon thy right hand. Upon thy right hand. For the sun shall not smite thee by day, nor the moon by night. He shall preserve thy soul, even forevermore. My help, my help, oh my help, all of my help cometh from the Lord. My help, my help, oh my help, all of my help cometh from the Lord.
Thank you so very much, Sister Christiana Cox. All of my help comes from the Lord. We ask now, my brothers and sisters, if you would consider this lesson. We continue with our Bible for Life series entitled Seasonal Change. Tonight's lesson is lesson number 21, and it is entitled Toward a Season of Recovery. Toward a Season of Recovery. Our scripture lesson is taken from Isaiah chapter 58, verses 9c. That is the third part of verse 9 through verse 11. And we want to just go into looking at that text. It reads this way: if you remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil, if you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness and your gloom be like the noonday. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places and make your bones strong. And you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters never fail. As we move immediately into our introduction, I want to lift up this thought. First of all, this life sometimes gets chaotic, confusing, disruptive. So disruptive and so confusing and so chaotic that we find it difficult or even impossible to try to reestablish a stable state of being. There are times, brothers and sisters, when we are going through so much. Our lives become so unbalanced that we are not capable of trying to reestablish ourselves in some sense of normalcy. In other words, life starts to spin around so much, or the symbolic foundations on which we stand start to shake so much that we are incapable of trying to get back to some degree of a regular life. When mere complications and challenges become full-blown calamities, we need emergency direction for navigating such horrible situations. That is, when trials turn into tragedies, when windstorms become hurricanes, when life takes a peculiar turn for the worse, we need some special tools. We need some extraordinary guidance. We need something that is out of the norm in order to pull us back together again. In this biblical passage that we have lifted up, Isaiah 58, 9c through 11, from a prophet who wrote under the assumed name of Isaiah, we do have such directions. This author gives us insights that move us toward a season of recovery. That's what we're going to find in this lesson, brothers and sisters, a season of recovery. As we move very quickly into our text, there are a number of issues that I want us to look at. We're going to look at the text basically in two ways. First of all, we're going to talk about what requirements there are that we have to meet in order to move toward a time of recovery or a season of recovery. And then we're going to talk about what God promises us if we meet those requirements. So we basically have two sections to this. We're going to talk about requirements first, and then we're going to talk about what God promises as a consequence of those requirements. So what are we required to do to move toward a season of recovery? In this particular text, the author mentions two things, and this is the first requirement. It is put in the form of a conditional statement. It says, if you remove the yoke from among you, that is the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil. That is the first requirement. People in a given group cannot recover from hardship when they consistently interact with disdain, malice, disrespect, or any other form of hostility toward one another. That is to say, people are not able to get their lives back together again. As long as there is bickering, as long as there is fighting, as long as there is division, as long as one group is pitted against another group, that will always prevent people from moving forward. The author of this text labels this mutually antagonistic atmosphere as a yoke. And I want to talk a little bit more about a yoke. You see here, brothers and sisters, what a yoke is. It is usually sort of a wooden apparatus that has two holes. Through those two holes, the heads of oxen are placed, so that the yoke actually rests on the neck of the oxen. And we have a picture of that right here, how the yoke kind of rests on the oxen. And the whole idea behind the yoke is so that the oxen can actually pull the weight together. Usually the oxen is pulling a plow or pulling some other kind of weight. But symbolically, the yoke in this context, and you will see a yoke in many other contexts, represents oppression, bondage, slavery, and subjection. That is what a yoke often represents. I wanted to lift up a couple of images here. These are images of African slaves in yoke-like restrictions. As Africans were brought to this hemisphere in slavery, they were often placed in shackles, that is, in chains. Many of you know this story and know it quite well. But another apparatus that was used in order to primarily prevent Africans from running away were these large metal neck braces that actually kept Africans from moving away. And these neck braces, particularly for Africans who had a tendency to run away, they would put them in these neck braces in order to keep them bound, to discourage running away. So this yoke idea actually becomes a symbol, not only a symbol, it was actually a tool for oppression. There is another picture that I want you to see that I am sure that most of you have already seen and have seen many, many times. But it sends us into the idea of a yoke around the neck as well. This, of course, is the image of George Floyd's murder, Minneapolis, Minnesota, 25th of May. Most of us have seen this picture over and over and over again. But I think, brothers and sisters, this picture harps back to the kinds of yokes that were placed on the necks of Africans. It even goes all the way back to the symbolic kind of yoke that is spoken of in our text. Remember, the yoke confines, the yoke constricts, the yoke enslaves, the yoke oppresses. That is the meaning of this idea of yoke. There are some other comments that can be made regarding this idea of yoke. King Rehoboam of Israel employed this symbolic notion of yoke when he declared to his people, the people of Israel, "Now, whereas my father," his father, of course, was the famed King Solomon. He says, "Whereas my father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions." What King Rehoboam was saying to the people is that although my father oppressed you, and you say, "Well, I thought Solomon was a great king." Well, you have to understand, Solomon was actually the greatest of the builders of the ancient Israelite kings. And in order to carry out all of those building projects, he had to levy very heavy tasks upon the people. In other words, he really did have to oppress the people, force the people, as it were, into working, into laboring in order to get all of that building done. Well, his son became king after him, Rehoboam. And after he became king, he told the people, look, I know my father was hard, but you haven't seen hard yet. Just wait until I get into my building program and just see how hard. Oh, yes, my father disciplined you with whips. But you know what? I'm going to discipline you with scorpions. Whips will cut your body, but scorpions will cut your body and poison you. The idea here is that the yoke symbolizes this kind of oppression. Another comment comes from the 16th president of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. He said, "It is not my nature when I see a people borne down by the weight of their shackles to make their life more bitter by heaping upon them greater burdens, but rather would I do all in my power to raise the yoke." Of course, most of us know what Abraham Lincoln was most famous for. He was most famous for leading this nation through a time of civil war. And although Abraham Lincoln had some ambivalence about the abolition of slavery, those of you who know history would know that, but he still, in order to preserve the nation, understood that the nation could not remain half slave and half free. Hence, he put the weight of the federal government behind freeing slaves in an attempt to keep the nation together. Another comment I want to lift up comes from Martin Luther King Jr. This is how he spoke about this yoke. There is such a thing as freedom of exhaustion. Some people are so worn down by the yoke of oppression that they give up. Here, Martin King understands oppression. He's, of course, speaking in the context of the 1960s civil rights movement, wherein African Americans went out into the streets. African Americans, along with others who desired to support them, to protest, to demonstrate, as it were, the atrocities of Jim Crow laws and the atrocities of even those laws that weren't Jim Crow, but were de facto Jim Crow laws. He understood that this was a yoke on the necks, on the bodies of African Americans. Again, the idea of yoke carries with it this notion of oppression, of subjugation. Here in this text, the people's yoke, however, did not come from an outside force, but rather from their contempt for one another. In other words, their mocking combativeness of one another relegated them to a state of bondage that prevented their nation from recovery. What was going on in Israel is that the people were combating and fighting one another. They were actually oppressing each other. They were trying to get the upper hand on one another. And this bickering, this fighting, this going back and forth, the prophet was telling them, was actually preventing them from actually moving into a state of recovery. Now, why are we talking about a state of recovery? That is because they had been taken into exile in Babylon, and now many of them had come back to the nation of Judah, and they were trying to rebuild. But a part of what got in the way of their rebuilding was the bickering that went on between them. And so the prophet is saying to them, look, if you want to rebuild, if you want to recover, if you want things to go in a good way, let me tell you something. You have got to do something about this conflict, this malice that you hold toward one another. This has to stop in order for you to move to a road of recovery. This means, my brothers and sisters, that a family, a community, a nation, or even a world places itself under a yoke of servitude and blocks its way forward when the members despise, belittle, oppress, and otherwise seek to undermine each other. Our point here is simply this. As long as any group that defines itself as a group, as long as any community that defines itself as a community, whenever that community has divisions and splits, and whenever there is a constant stalking of, of long-standing divisions that cause the divides to be even greater, as long as people are trying to pit one group against another, trying to divide and conquer, then brothers and sisters, there is no way for that group to move forward. Wow. Doesn't that sound very familiar to you? This constant pitting of one group against another, and that pitting of one group against another is actually what holds people back. This came to my mind, but I'm going to say it anyway. I had second thoughts about saying it, but I'm going to say it. I really want to say, and I don't know whether any people will ever get this or not, but I want to say to those brothers and sisters who support the kinds of divisive language that we hear coming from the highest office in this land, those who are listening to it, I want to say something to you. I am not your enemy. The truth of the matter is that I actually love you. If I saw you in the ditch, I'd help to get you out. People whom you think are your enemies are not your enemies. You need to be careful and listen very carefully about who your enemy really is, because who your enemy really is the person that actually keeps you down, that holds you back, that keeps stalking division where people can't get together and build up the nation together. Stop falling for it. Let it go. People that you think are, of course, we might have differences of opinions on certain things, but not your enemies. I don't want to see you dead. Most of the people that you might think are your enemies do not want to see you hurt or harmed, but would rather sit down and try to talk with you in a civilized manner. Be careful about those who stalk and push for division and separation. Be very, very careful, because they are actually the ones that hold the nation back. Brothers and sisters, the reason that we are not further along in our fight against COVID-19 is because we are a divided nation, and everything, absolutely everything, is being politicized. When a virus is neither a Democrat nor a Republican nor an independent. A virus is a virus, and it will strike Democrats, it will strike Republicans, it will strike independents, it will strike people of every ethnic group. Why is it being politicized? That's that kind of division that keeps a yoke. The yoke. Look at the statistics. Look at the curves in the European Union as they have gone down. Look at the curves in the Asian nations as they have gone down. Why, tell me, are the rates of the disease going up in the United States of America, supposedly the strongest and most advanced nation in the world? Why is it? It's not because we don't have brilliant physicians. It's because we are divided, and the division creates a yoke. In order to get the yoke off, you got to get rid of that division. God bless you. The prophet's first requirement then for moving toward a season of recovery was removing the yoke of the pointing of the finger and the speaking of evil within the community. Here is the second requirement. If you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, that's how you move toward a season of recovery. All right. The indication here, my brothers and sisters, is that our broader group recovery, at least in part, hinges on our efforts to assist the distressed and oppressed among us. We are not going anywhere until we take care of those who are most vulnerable in our society. The society will never get where it is supposed to get, never be what it is supposed to be, never fully develop as a thriving society until we take care of what Jesus called the least of these. We can list a number of verses from the Proverbs that make this point about our obligations to aid the afflicted among us. Here are some of those Proverbs. Those who despise their neighbors are sinners, but happy are those who are kind to the poor. Then in Proverbs 14:31, we read, those who oppress the poor insult their maker, but those who are kind to the needy honor him. Two things are going on here. First of all, you get internal happiness. You get a sense of satisfaction when actually you help those who are downtrodden. Secondly, you also make God happy when you assist those who are needy. So you get, as it were, a kind of double benefit by assisting the needy. The next two Proverbs say, whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord and will be repaid in full. Then those who are generous are blessed, for they share their bread with the poor. Then finally, from the Proverbs, whoever gives to the poor will lack nothing, but one who turns a blind eye will get many a curse. When we think about this whole notion and idea of the poor, we can think about Jesus' parable that was told in Matthew chapter 25. There in that parable, brothers and sisters, Jesus talked about two persons that the master came and confronted. And these two persons that the master confronted had two different outcomes. To one of these persons, he said, when I was hungry, you gave me no food. When I was thirsty, you didn't give me anything to drink. When I was sick and in prison, you didn't come to visit me. When I was naked, you didn't clothe me. Then the person asked, Lord, when did we see you hungry and we didn't do anything for you, or thirsty or sick or in prison? He said, inasmuch as you didn't do it for the least of these, you did not do it to me. Then to the other servant, he said, when I was hungry, you did feed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was sick and in prison, you came to visit me. When I was naked, you clothed me. He said, well, Master, when did that happen? He said, when you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. In other words, my brothers and sisters, we do not get right with God until we get right with our brothers and sisters who suffer the most in this world. This world is not going to get off the snide. We will constantly be plagued by bitterness and strife and difficulty as long as we fail to really take care of the poor. This nation, and indeed this world, will not become what it ought to be until it does right by the poor. Consider, if you will, these 8 facts from the Global Poverty Report of 2020. Fact number 1, globally, 10% of the world is living on less than $2 a day. This is called extreme poverty. That means over 700 million people in the world are living on less than $2 a day. $2 a day. Second fact, for every 1,000 children born, 39 will die before they turn 5 years old. The principal reason that this many children are dying, because of malnutrition. They're dying because they cannot get a vaccine for a disease that has been nearly eradicated for decades now. They cannot do that because they can't get clean water to drink. The reason that many children are dying. Then, fact number 3, globally in 2016, over 63 million children ages 6 to 11 were not attending school. You say, well, what does this have to do with poverty? It has everything in the world to do with poverty. If children can't go to school, they cannot learn. If children cannot learn, they cannot ever really hope to move, at least not as a group, hope to move out of their depressed and oppressed state. Education is one of the keys. Number 4, of all the children living in extreme poverty, 75% live in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. Now, my brothers and sisters, I wanted to lift this one up for this reason. We're in the midst of a movement of Black Lives Mattering. Well, these are poor Black lives and Asian lives. People who are on the bottom of the economic ladder. The masses of people who live both in Africa and in Asia who are in extreme poverty is excruciatingly painful when you stop to think about it. Brothers and sisters, until we do something about Africa and Asia, the world will never be whole. Number 5, today approximately 8.9% of the world's total population is still practicing open defecation. I'll simply try to say this. That means that's about 9% of the world's population who still allow their human excrements to come out of their bodies. And they're just allowing these excrements to come out in the places where they live, just on top of the ground, in the water that they're drinking, just in places right around where they live. Consequently, the bacteria that grows on it ends up in their food, and it comes back to actually harm them and in many cases kill them. Fact number 6, rural populations around the world are 7 times as likely as urban populations to be drinking contaminated water. That is water that contains bacteria that will harm them. People just need some clean water. Flint, Michigan, people just need some clean water. Clean water. Yet, what have we done as a human race? We have polluted God's streams, God's rivers, God's lakes over and over and over and over and over again. And people who need clean water can't even get it because they do not have the apparatus or the apparati in order to clean the water. Number 7, only 45% of rural populations have the knowledge and resources to manage their own health by simply washing their hands with soap and water. They just don't have it. It's just not present. I know those of us who live here in the United States of America, those of us who live in places where you have readily accessible running water systems, you can go to a store and buy soap and you can wash your hands whenever you want to. There is no shortage, and you think everything is just fine. Well, there are people in this world, many people in this world, who do not have that luxury. And number 8, people in the United States are expected to live 18 years longer on average than those who are born in sub-Saharan Africa. This is just another way of saying that Black lives do matter. And until we deal with what is happening to these Black lives, yes, here in the United States of America, to be sure, but also around the world, this is not just a local or a national issue. It is an international issue. Right. The prophet's second requirement here is for to move toward a season of recovery involves providing food to the hungry and satisfying the needs of the afflicted. Once again, I want to simply say, brothers and sisters, until we deal with the poor among us, we will not get a handle on moving forward in this world. Okay, that brings us to our second major question. What does God promise when we meet the two stated requirements for moving toward a season of recovery? What does God do for us? What does God say God is going to give to us if we stop this bickering and this fighting, if we throw off this yoke of oppression, and if we take care of the least of these among us? What does God say God will do for us? Here's how the prophet understood it. Promise number 1 is this: your light shall rise in the darkness, and your gloom will be like the noonday. In other words, the virtuous intent of your heart and the moral decency of your deeds will shine forth like a blessing in any dark, depressed, and adverse situation. That's to say, if we do what God has asked us to do, if we throw off that yoke, if we are concerned about the afflicted, God will permit our lights to shine even in the midst of a dark, dismal, and sometimes depressing world. So, in Isaiah 60:1, we read, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you." It's what the prophet said to the people after they did what God told them to do. And then, of course, we know what Jesus taught. He said, "Let your light so shine before others so that they can see your good works and glorify God in heaven." That's Matthew 5:16. In other words, Jesus was saying, look, wherever you go, you let your light shine. Wherever you go, you do what God requires of you. And what does the Lord require? The prophet said to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. That's what God requires of us. And if we just let our light shine, God will get the glory and the people around us will be blessed. And we can start moving toward that season of recovery. Promise number 2, the Lord will guide you continually. If we fulfill these requirements, God will guide us. God guides the humble in what is right, and God teaches them God's way. Our steps are made firm or ordered by the Lord. When he delights in our way, though we stumble, we shall not fall headlong. Why? For the Lord holds us by the hand. God orders our steps. We remember, brothers and sisters, that song by the Brooklyn Tabernacle Choir, "Order my steps in your word, dear Lord."
Order my steps in your word, dear Lord. Lead me, guide me
Every day.
every day.
Oh, send your anointing.
Send your anointing.
Father,
Father, I pray.
order my steps.
Order my steps in your word. Lead steps in your word.
Promise number 3. God will satisfy your needs in parched places. Note, if you will, that the satisfaction of our needs is tied to the satisfaction of the needs of the afflicted that we mentioned in verse 10. That is to say, brothers and sisters, we cannot really expect to have our needs met until we are meeting the needs of those who are down and destitute and distraught in this world. Don't think you can go off and just have a good time by yourself. Oh, it might seem like everything is going just well and you don't have to give a care or concern. But let me tell you something. Something on the inside will not be right. There will be a kind of disconnect, a sort of uneasiness. And what will happen is that you'll try to satisfy that uneasiness by getting more and more things, by accumulating more and more material wealth. But you will find that the material wealth will not satisfy that deepest longing that we have to be in fellowship with our brothers and sisters. So as long as there is that separation, we will not have satisfaction. If we meet those requirements, particularly the requirement of attending to the needs of the afflicted, that's when our needs are met. Even in situations of gross scarcity, God will, as the Apostle Paul might say, supply all your need according to God's riches in glory. Kurt Franklin said, He will supply. He will supply. Jesus said that He will supply.
Though your vessel be empty,
He will.
He will supply. For His yoke is easy.
He will.
He will supply. He will supply.
He will supply. Oh, Jesus said that He would supply. Jesus said that He would supply. Promise number 4. God will make your bones strong. God will make your bones strong. In Psalm 28:8, the Lord is the strength of His people. He is the saving refuge of His anointed. Psalm 118:14 says, the Lord is my strength and my might. He has become my salvation. I want to tell you something, though, about this particular word that is translated as make strong or strengthen here. It is a verb that actually means to pull off. It means to strip, to deliver, to draw out. And hence it means to equip or to arm, as in arming with defensive and offensive weapons, and thereby to strengthen. The idea behind strengthening in this context is this: you become strong when you come out of something, when you are delivered from something. You say, well, what in the world is this writer talking about? Go back to the early part of the passage. The early part of the passage talked about the people being under a yoke. It is when you come out from under that yoke, when you are delivered from that bondage, when you come out of that situation of oppression and depression and suppression, when you are no longer bickering with one another, fighting and tearing one another down, when you come out from the yoke, that's when you become strong. That's how God makes us strong in this situation. This brings us to promise number 5. The prophet says, You shall be like a watered garden. A watered garden, of course, yields produce, and produce serves as a sustenance for the people. The idea here, my brothers and sisters, is this, is that when we meet these requirements, God will turn us into productive individuals that actually help to sustain other people. We become a person from whom other people gain strength, gain understanding, get sustenance so that they can move forward in this world. In other words, God will turn you into somebody that will become a blessing to somebody else. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather be a blessing than even to receive a blessing. You understand what I'm saying? I would rather be a blessing than to even receive a blessing, because the ultimate blessing that you can receive is to become a blessing to somebody else. That's why we read in the Bible, it is more blessed to give than to receive, because when you start giving, you are becoming a blessing to somebody else, and you become more blessed because you are blessing someone else. That's what we become when we become a watered garden. One psalm says, those who delight in the law of the Lord are like trees planted by streams of water, which yield their fruit in their season. Their leaves also do not wither, and whatever they do, they prosper. Whatever they do, they prosper. I know that sounds like a way out of the way promise. Whatever they do. Now, notice that text does not say that whatever they do, they have success according to human standards. It's not what they said. It doesn't even say that whatever they do, they never lose. It says whatever they do, they prosper. That is to say, because God has blessed who and what they are, because they are living in God, with God, for God, and according to God's law, then God actually turns everything that they do into something beneficial. Oh, I hear, don't you hear it ringing in your ear? What the Apostle Paul said, all things work together for good for those who love God and who are called according to God's purpose. That means that you are like a tree planted by the rivers of water. You bring forth your fruit in its season, and your leaves don't wither. And whatever you do prospers. Because whatever you do, God is going to turn it out, shape it up, flip it over, move it into something that is good. The Apostle Paul would probably say that you will perpetually produce fruit of the Spirit. In other words, if you are this kind of garden, what you're going to do is produce the right kind of fruit, like love and joy and peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And there he says is no law against these things. In other words, people can try to talk against them, but there's really nothing legitimate that you can say against any of this. But this is what people who become watered gardens for the Lord do. They actually bear this kind of fruit. Promise number 6. The prophet says, you shall be like a spring of water whose waters never fail. This brings us down to the end of our text, brothers and sisters. You'll be like a spring of water that never fails. This is a slightly different metaphor here. On the one hand, you're going to be like a garden that is perpetually watered, a well-watered garden. But here, the idea is that you will actually become the spring water. It is the spring water that gives life. And my mind immediately went to this story that you see on your screen, the story of Jesus and the woman of Samaria in John number 4. Most of you may remember that story. There was this woman in the town of Samaria, and she went to the well in the middle of the day one day, and Jesus had decided that he was going to walk through Samaria, a place where people of Jesus's ethnic group rarely went, because there was always conflict between Jews and Samaritans. But Jesus decided to go that day, and he stopped at this well. As this woman came forward, Jesus asked the woman, will you give me a drink of water? The woman said, why is it that you, a Jew, is asking me, a Samaritan, for a drink of water? And then Jesus said, well, if you knew who was asking you for a drink of water, you would ask him for a drink of water, and that water would become in you a spring unto everlasting life. In other words, Jesus was saying, look, I know we were talking about getting some water out of this well, but what I want you to understand is this. I'm talking about a different kind of water. I'm talking about a kind of water that can be in you, where you become a spring of living water. In other words, you won't have to come to this well all the time and get the kind of water, because I know you came to this well to get more than just physical water. You actually came to this well to get some peace from people who are talking about you. Yes, Jesus said, I know about you. I know about the 5 men you've had, and that the one that you're with now is not your husband. Jesus said, I understand that about your life. Then, of course, the conversation goes on. I don't want to go into all the detail of the conversation, but Jesus eventually imparts to this woman this living water. And you know what? The woman turns into a spring of water herself. And you know what springs of water do? They go and water things. So how did this woman go and water things? She ran back into her town and she told the townspeople, come and see a man who told me everything that I have ever done. He could be the Messiah. And so the people of her town ran out to see Jesus. They talked with Jesus for a while. And you know what? Jesus turned them into springs, because eventually they told the woman, you know what? We needed your testimony to hear about this Jesus at first, but now we don't need your testimony anymore. We believe for ourselves. In other words, they became springs of living water. My brothers and sisters, that is what God is calling us to become today. Springs of living water, where everything we touch, everywhere we go, it becomes more fruitful, more fragrant, more beautiful. God is calling upon us to make the world a better place, become a spring of living water, and start to turn this world around. And let us together, brothers and sisters, seek to move into our season of recovery. God bless you and God keep you. This is our prayer. We take one moment now to extend an invitation to Christian discipleship. If you're here today and God is speaking to you, and you feel and you think that it is your time to make that special connection with your Creator, we invite you to do so today. This is the invitation. Upon your screen, you will see how you can contact us. Please take note of the phone number 404-844-4282, or email us at zhbc@zionhill.org. We will look to hear from you. Sister Christiana Cox.
If it had not been for the Lord on my side, I want to know, where would I be? Where would I be? You know, He kept my enemies away. He let the sun shine through a cloudy day. He wrapped me in the cradle of His arms when He knew I had been battered and torn. Oh, if it had not been for the Lord on my side, I want to know, where would I be?
Our brothers and sisters, we are grateful that you have shared with us on today. And we hope that you have heard something, seen something that will draw you just a little bit closer to God, that will open up your mind, that will cause you to think, but not only to think, but also to act. Again, we thank God for your presence here with us this evening. We ask now that we would go to God in prayer together. God, thank you for this day, for an opportunity to serve. We ask, God, that you would bless what we have heard. Permit us to hear your word in these words. Now minister to us, God, in all of the sundry places we have needs. We know that you are able. You have supplied us before. We expect you. We anticipate that you will supply us again. Be with us, God, now as we leave this place. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you and God keep you.